Well, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Alison from the Southern Cross Postgraduate Association. Very pleased to welcome you all here. We're hosting today Presenting Your Research with Confidence with Hugh Kearns from Thinkwell. So we are recording, and I will post the recording link to our YouTube channel. I'll also post that link in the chat box for you. I also encourage you to become a member of the Postgraduate Association and help us support all these workshops that we deliver to you. So I'll also post that link. That's enough from me. Welcome, everyone. Over to you, Hugh. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Yeah. Look, welcome along. We're going to talk about presenting your research with confidence. So first of all, who I am. So my name is Hugh Kearns. If I was there in person, that's what I would look like. It'd be lovely to be there in person, but a lot of my work is online these days, so you just have to do with that picture. I will just tell you where I am. This is a map of Australia, but it's a bit different. This one is showing all the First Nations here. And I'm here in Adelaide in the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. So I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I have a few jobs here in Adelaide. One is at Flinders University, doing some lecturing and researching on the topic of self-management, how people manage themselves. And I'm really interested in why people don't manage themselves, all the things that get in the way that make it hard for people. But I suppose I've been doing this work for about 25 years, giving lots of talks and lectures, training and lecturing like this. I've spoken at national and international conferences. I think one of the hardest was to the Australian Institute of Training and Development, because as you're talking to them, they're watching how you do it. I think the hardest was to a group of psychiatrists, because of course, as you're talking to them, you're thinking they're analyzing everything you've said. I'll come back to that slide in a moment. Now, most of my time, though, is not at Flinders at all now. It's running workshops like this for people like you all around Australia and all over the world about how to be more effective. And if you want to find out more, there is a website called thinkwell.com.au. And our research is published there. There's lots of resources on there you can download for free that can help you organize and plan your research. Also on the website, there's a book called Presenting Your Research with Confidence, and I'm pretty sure that should be available through the library there at Southern Cross, so maybe have a look at it on the library system. Now, if you're listening carefully to the accent, you'll think it's not a very Adelaide-sounding accent, and that's right, because I'm from a place called Sligo, and Sligo is there on the west coast of Ireland. And my degree, a long time ago now, was at University College Dublin in agricultural science. So I started off as a scientist, then moved from science into education for a while, and then from education into psychology. So I've moved around a few different parts of the academy over the years. So that's me. Now let's find out about you. And if we were together, we'd shake hands. We do that virtually. And I'm going to get you to type into the chat box for me just your name and where are you? That's town, city, country. Are you on campus, at home? Have you got a nice big cup of coffee beside you or a cat crawling around at your feet? There's 16 of us here. Let's find out who's here. Mason is at home on the Gold Coast. Good afternoon. Melissa in Northern Lakes in Brisbane and Natalie in Laurelton. Gozia is on the Gold Coast. Karen in Coffs Harbour, working from home today. Amy doing a PhD by distance based in Melbourne. No. Bridget in Coffs Harbour. Jasper is currently in the Gold Coast. Seb, Northern New South Wales. Jack in the Gold Coast. Alison in the Home Office. And Hannah on the Gold Coast. Right. Mia is on the Gold Coast as well. Lovely. Look, we're going to use that chat box again later on. I'll get you to type in some things in response to some questions. If you have questions, put them in there as well. And we're also going to use the breakout room. So you get to meet some of these people and talk about some of the ideas we're going to go through. And you get a lot more from the workshop if you can get involved in the discussions and the chats with your colleagues as well. And the good news is we're going to have a break halfway through. So hang on for then. You can have another tea or a coffee or a little stretch in the middle. So let's get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a short video clip. It's only about 40 seconds long. And this is probably the most famous speech in the last 60 years. And this is when Martin Luther King was talking to about 200,000 people in Capitol Hill in the US. And we're going to listen to about 40 seconds, and then I'm going to ask you what makes this interesting or memorable. So let's have a look.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
All right, so let's have a little discussion about that. I'm just going to get you to type into the chat for me. What is it that makes that memorable, or that, we would still talk about it 60 years afterwards? What was it about it or the way he did it, or your reactions to it? So get you to type into the chat your response to Martin Luther King. Yeah, the repetition of "I have a dream" is really important because everybody thinks they know that talk, but really the only thing people know is "I have a dream." It's the "I have a dream" speech. And he uses that as a way, as a hook to get people in, and then he puts things onto it. And we'll talk about repetition when that's a passion and evoking emotion. Yeah, he looked like he was interested in it, didn't he? Inspiring, pausing between key phrases. And Melissa, that is really hard to do when you're anxious, because when you're anxious, you just want to get to the end as fast as you can. But he paused, let the audience clap, and come back again. Charismatic, and he was obviously a very famous person at that time, and catchy. A preacher like cadence, and by that we mean his voice goes up and down. There's a variety in his voice, because if you have a very monotone voice, it's hard to keep people engaged. So he has that, and he speeds up, he slows down. It said bridging the difference in black and white, and obviously the topic was very relevant to the audience as well. Kearns said he was putting his ideas into little stories, and that's important. He was talking about freedom, but he was talking about my 4 children playing on the hills of Georgia. So he made it very concrete. And that's one of the things you can do as well with your research. You talk about vague things, but make it concrete or practical examples. And that's what he was doing there. Yeah, look, a couple of things that I want you to get from that talk. The first one is he looked like he cared about what he was talking about. Because if you're giving a talk and you don't look very interested, it is very hard for the audience. And I always think this should be easy for researchers, because apparently you like your research. Wouldn't you want people to know about it? And so that energy and passion can come through. And often you'll hear people say, "Oh no, it's very objective. You don't have to have the personality in it." But if you think to any talks you've ever been that were enjoyable or memorable, it was because the person looked like they cared about their stuff. And the second one is he prepared well. This wasn't something where he just made it up on the morning. He was on the plane there thinking, "Oh, I'll say these things." No, this was a really well-rehearsed thing. And I've read the history of the talk. And first of all, he was preparing his whole life for it, really, because he was a Southern preacher and he had all the skills of that. But for this particular talk, the night beforehand, he was in the hotel crossing out words, trying it out. This was really well-rehearsed. It wasn't just, let's just see how it goes on the day. The interesting thing as well about it is, you notice he didn't choose PowerPoint. Imagine giving a presentation and not having PowerPoint. Now, in 1963, he wouldn't have had PowerPoint, but it wouldn't really help, would it? If he had the bullet points bouncing in or some transitions or animations, that wasn't really what it was about. We couldn't consider doing it now without PowerPoint, but the reality is it wasn't going to help in that case. So the other 2 things I want you to get is you're allowed to put some passion and energy into your talk, and you need to prepare well. And we're going to look at the preparing now. And I like a thing called the presentation iceberg. Jack says, "Got an excuse for not doing your slides." Yeah, Jack, if you're not going to put the slides, you better do a really good presentation. Yep. So what you've seen with me and what you've seen with Martin Luther King is the tip of the iceberg, the top part. And that's what we think it's all about. But the reality is most of the work goes below the tip of the iceberg. And that's structure. And Martin Luther King's was, I have a dream. And that's his hook, and he gets you involved with that, and he goes through it. Underneath that is preparation, and that is knowing your audience, making sure it's pitched at the right level for the people who are going to be there, and having a structure. And the last thing then is having something to talk about, which again, as I said, should be relatively easy for you, because so you're allowed to let your interest in your topic come through. So we're going to look at preparation now, and if any of you are giving a talk soon, I want you to think about these ideas and put it into the context of that talk, and how you would do this practically. Think about how you've done how you've prepared so far. Maybe you need to change a few things. So, but when most people are getting ready for a presentation, the first thing most people do is, well, they think about all the stuff I'm going to put into the presentation. What am I going to put in all the slides and all the stuff? And that's the wrong place to start, really. What you have to do is start with the message. It's sometimes called the take-home message. What are they going to walk away with? What will they know when they leave? Because they're not going to remember all the stuff. They're going to remember some key things, and you have to work out what is the main message. And ideally, you'd be able to summarize your research down into 1 or 2 sentences so that people can remember that. Or what's important to know about what you've done. They don't have to know everything, but what's the important part? And I'll tell you why that's important. I like this person called Hermann Ebbinghaus. And Hermann Ebbinghaus was a German psychologist back in the 19th century. But he was interesting because his research was about forgetting and memory. But what I liked about him was he became the subject in his own research. And what he did was he made up what were called nonsense words. He made up hundreds of these little words, put them on bits of paper and put them in a bag, and then he would pull them out randomly and try and remember them. And then he would measure how quickly he forgot. This was a very simple test, but it was quite clever, wasn't it? And so within about an hour, he could remember about 44% of what he had just learned. Within a day, he could remember a third. And a month later, he could remember about a fifth. Now, that was when Hermann was trying very hard. Unfortunately, the people who are coming to your talk are not going to be trying that hard. And the bad news for me is by the time I've finished this talk today, you will have forgotten 90% of everything I've said. And you'll probably even remember the wrong 10%. And just to prove that to you, think about all the talks you've been to in your life. You don't remember very much about them at all. You'll remember something unusual or something weird or whatever, but you don't remember all the detail. So that's the mistake we make. We think, I'm going to fill my presentation full of detail. People aren't going to remember it. So you have to work out, what is the message? And whenever I'm giving a talk, I have a couple of tests I give to myself. And the first one is called the coffee shop test. And the idea there is, let's imagine you're giving a presentation at a conference, and you're the person just before the morning tea break or the coffee break. So all the people go out and talk to their friends out there, and their friends will say, what was that talk about? Now, the person is not going to go, oh, they had 14 slides and they all this. No, they're going to remember 1 or 2 phrases. Oh, this person was doing research about this, or what's the key thing? And your job is, how do I get the right words into their head? How do I get that message in so they can remember what I was really talking about? So that's the coffee shop test. They're not going to remember a lot, so you have to work out what is the stuff I really want them to remember. So let's say you've got an idea of that, and you think, well, I'm going to tell them how we gathered our data. I have 3 questions I always ask people, and the first question is, so what? Why would the audience care about that? What does it matter? Once you've answered that question, the next question is, so what? And once you've answered that, the third question is, so what? And you keep asking that question until you work out, why is it important? Why would anybody care about this? Why does it matter in some way? So these are good questions as well, by the way, when you're writing as well. You think you're going to add all these paragraphs. So what? Do they make a difference? Do they add in some way? So these are good questions. When you're thinking of a slide, I'm going to put that slide into my presentation. You should ask, so what? Would anybody want that? Is it relevant? Is it useful? And you keep narrowing down until you work out what the important bit is. So that's the first little thing you have to do in any of your talks, is work out what's the message, what's the main thing I want to get across here. All right. So now we've done that. The next thing we have to look at is who's going to be coming to your talk. Who's the audience? And there's a series of questions, and I think I sent you a handout with this on it. But like, how many people are going to be there? You know, the number of people in the audience, because that's important. Like, if it's just going to be you and your teddy bear sitting in the room, you know, you just have a little chat around a little table. But if you're talking to a huge group of people, you do it differently. So how many people are going to be there? And that's also important for the room size or handouts, other things you're going to have. So to get a bit of a sense how many people are coming. What's the background of those people? Let's say you're doing medical research. So if you're doing medical research, if the audience are clinicians, they'll want to know, how do we apply this? How do we put it into practice in our job? If there are other medical researchers, they'll want to know, how did you do the research? If they're patients, they'll want to know, is it going to make me better? And so the background of the people, and if it's a mixed audience, you probably have to cover lots of different examples to include everybody in the room. What do they already know about your topic? Because that tells you how high or low to set the bar. Because if you assume they know nothing and you're going really, really slow, but they actually know quite a lot, they're going to get bored. You know, they'll say, come on, speed up. But equally, if you assume they know heaps and they don't, and you're using lots of jargon and words, they're going to get distracted or lost because they don't understand it. So you need to know what they already know about your topic. One of the ways to work that out a little bit is look at your audience. Like if you say something and they all look really confused, you might go, are people familiar with these terms? Or, you know, get a bit of a sense of the audience. Their attitude. Are they going to be in favor of your topic or hostile to it? And you know, if they're going to be hostile to your topic, you better get ready for some difficult questions, and you might build that into your presentation. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, he was always seen as a great public speaker. Now, Steve Jobs only ever spoke at Apple conferences, and of course, everybody there loved him. If he was in front of all the Windows users, it might not have gone so well. So, you know, the attitude of your audience. The age. Now, again, in a university context, we will assume it's 18 through to 65 or so. But occasionally, you might have to go and give some presentation to a group of pensioners, and the examples there will be very different than you would use to a group of teenagers who are all texting all the way through your talk. So again, you might make different examples or different references to depending on the age of the audience. Are they there willingly? In most cases in universities, if people don't want to be there, they just don't turn up. But occasionally, you might have to give a lecture where people are forced to attend. In which case, you have to work harder to keep people engaged because they're going to tune out easily. They don't want to be there. So you have to have more interactions and more engagement in the talk. And the last one is, let's say you have no idea. I don't know the audience at all. Well, my first piece of advice is work a bit harder and try and find out. Go and talk to the people who invited you, who are asking you to give a talk, or go along to somebody who went to the thing last year and find out how they did it. Look at other people's presentations and see what they did. And that gives you a sense of how, if you're going to a conference, go to the conference webpage and look at what sort of presentations were about last year. It gives you a sense of who might be there at the talk. But if you genuinely have no idea, you still have to work harder because now you might have to make extra material. Like if you don't know whether people's knowledge levels are, you might have some basic examples and more complicated examples that you might vary depending on the audience who turn up there as well. Okay, so that's who's going to be there. So now we go on to where is it going to be? And so is it going to be formal or informal? And if you look at that picture there, that's the classic academic conference or a conference where there's a person up on the stage, everybody else is in rows watching it. And so that's very formal. It's very obvious. The person's going to do the talking, other people are sitting and listening. However, you might want informal. And so you might want people sitting around tables and having a chat or group work. Whenever I walk into a room, the first job is start moving the seats around to get them the way I want. And so if I want to have more interaction, they're going to be around tables like that. If it's more formal or whatever. Now, again, if you're in a lecture theatre, you know, the seats are sort of stuck, so you can't do much about it. But again, if you're giving a talk in a very big room and there's only a small number of people, you want to bring the seats up to the front so that they're not all spread out around the place. Or if you're in a lecture theatre, you could ask people to move down a little bit so that they're closer to you. Heating and lighting is important. Heating, it's better if the room starts off a little bit cooler, because once all the bodies come in, it's going to heat up. And once people start to get hot, they're very hard for them to focus. And so again, if I'm running a workshop, I'll usually open the doors halfway through or during the break to cool things down a bit. Now, lighting is important for audiovisual stuff. If you're using PowerPoint or whatever, and the sun is beaming in or there are lights beaming on, people won't see your slides, so you need to check the lighting. But now we're going to talk about equipment. And I'm going to give you some examples about this, and I'm going to talk about equipment fails. And I can talk about this with great confidence because I've had all these happen to me. And then I'll get you to discuss it. But the first thing is you turn up at the venue and you say, where's the computer? And they go, we thought you were bringing the computer. And there's no computer. So I always bring my own laptop with me and the power cable because it's going to run out of battery halfway through. But let's say there is a computer. Most rooms have one these days in universities. So you get there and you turn it on, and then a window pops up saying password. And of course, you don't know the password, and neither does anybody else. So now you've got to ring up the IT help desk at 5 minutes to 9, just before your presentation, when everybody else is ringing up IT at the same time. And of course, all the audience are watching you do this. But let's say you get through the password, and then you open up, you put your memory stick in because you brought on a memory stick. Now, to stop people stealing the computers, the computer is usually behind a little screen or something like that. So you put in the memory stick, but of course, because you're anxious, it falls down behind the little door, and now you've got to ring up people and say, "Can I have memory stick back?" Or as it says on the screen there, the computer says, "We can't read your memory stick," or it's not going to work. So again, you need to have multiple copies of it, have one up in the cloud, send it beforehand, and have a copy with you as well. But let's say you get past that. And then, of course, what happens is you open up PowerPoint. But of course, the version of PowerPoint on the computer is completely different from the one on your laptop. And now all your lovely fonts have disappeared, or the images don't work, or the resolution is wrong, or that animation you had just doesn't work anymore. You get past that, and you have the projector is having an argument with the computer, and they're not talking to each other, and so you got to reboot the whole thing. All of this happening at 5 minutes to 9. The other one is you found some wonderful video, like the Martin Luther King video, okay? And you put a link into it, you press that, and of course it doesn't work because the internet isn't working, or it's too slow, or takes too long to load. Or the other one that's happened is halfway through your presentation, Windows decides now's the time we need to update Windows, and says, and don't turn off the computer or something bad will happen, and so you're stuck there doing that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put you into breakout groups. That means you'll be in a group with about 3 or 4 other people. Turn on your audio video and say hello to them when you're there. And then I want you to have a little chat about equipment fails. Ones you've seen, I'm sure you've seen other people. You might have had your own experiences as well. And I'm going to give you about 4 or 5 minutes to do this. So you should see a link wending its way to you now. If you don't see the link, sometimes it's hidden behind other windows on your screen or a different screen or something like that. So just have a little look around. All right, welcome back. So hopefully you have been to some interesting talks. And again, I would encourage you to sort of just watch how they do it. And I'm going to put a couple of links or suggestions into the chat for you now. Good places to go and look for talks. And one is the TED Talks. And like there's thousands of TED Talks there. And usually they're short. They're in all disciplines. So they'll be in your discipline. But watch them for the content. But then watch them also. How do they do it? Like how do they open it up? How do they finish it? How do they keep it engaging? But also another good place to go is the 3-minute thesis. And there are lots of those online as well. People have only 3 minutes. And so they're trying to make it engaging. And so just watch how do they do it, and then think, is there some of those examples I could borrow? So when you see a good person doing a presentation, think, I like the way, what could I take from that or borrow from that talk to make it engaging or interesting? All right. Now, I told you before, people have a very short attention span, and we've been going for almost an hour. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a break for about 10 minutes. I'm going to put a little clock on the screen. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes, and we'll have to come back and pick it up then. So I'll see you in about 10 minutes' time. So we're now going to talk about what you bring to the presentation. And this is your notes, really, or the materials you're going to bring along with you. And one of the mistakes researchers make or academics make is they think, well, my paper or my thesis or whatever, that's the notes. But of course, writing is very different from speaking. And when we write very complicated notes and very complicated sentences. But when you speak, it's much more informal than that. So the physical paper or your thesis or whatever is not what you're going to use to do the talking. You have to have different notes for that. And so you could use the Sarah Palin model of notes. So she was a potential US vice president a few years ago, and so there on her hand, she's got her notes. So she's going to talk about energy, budget cuts, and tax, or whatever. Now, the problem of writing your notes on your hand is when you get stressed, they all sort of sweaty and blur together, so it doesn't work very well. And it's probably not a great look to be up there on the stage looking at your hand like that. You'll notice Martin Luther King did have notes. He had a full set of notes. Now, he wasn't reading them out. Those notes were there as a backup, and if I was talking to 200,000 people, I'd have a full set of notes as well. Now, he's got the notes in his hand. Now, I have to tell you, size 12 font notes are useless. Because when you're sitting at home, as you are now, this is all very easy. When you're standing up in front of a group of people talking, about 90% of your brain cells disappear. And a simple job like finding your place on a piece of paper suddenly becomes very difficult. And you look down and all the words just blur together and you can't see. So you need size 14, maybe size 16, and even up to 18, and double spaced, so that when you look down, you can immediately see the words, and ideally maybe highlight a few of the words. So when you look down, oh, that's what I'm going to talk about. Because this is all very easy when you're relaxed, but when you're stressed, you want to make this as foolproof as possible. It means you'll have to have a few extra pages, but that's going to be better than looking down and getting overwhelmed by the notes. Now, some people use these index cards for their notes, and they're good because you can have some keywords on them. The problem with index cards is that they're loose leaf, and when you're anxious, they'll all fall on the floor, so you need to hold them together in some way, but also maybe number them so you can find out which order you're supposed to go in. But what most people use for notes is PowerPoint. And that's what I'm doing. When I see the word PowerPoint, it reminds me, oh, now I've got to talk about the next thing. And in PowerPoint, you have a notes function where you can have the slide and the notes underneath it, and that's quite useful. It keeps them together. So let's have a chat about PowerPoint. PowerPoint is wonderful and PowerPoint is terrible. There's a phrase called PowerPoint crimes. So I'm going to get you to type into the chat, have you committed any PowerPoint crimes? No doubt you have seen many PowerPoint crimes. So I'll get you to type in examples of PowerPoint crimes. Mistakes made with PowerPoint. Yeah, reading straight off the slides. Yep, so the audience are thinking I can read myself. Yep. Font too small. Yeah, at the back of the room you can't see it. Sickening transitions. Yeah, so they found lots of exciting ways to make the slides transition and animate. And it says too much information, and this is probably the biggest complaint is people just fill the screen full of text usually. tons of words in a small font, Melissa, absolutely. And so they got lots and lots of stuff on there. Can't see the animations, so they don't work. Yeah, too much information again is probably the biggest one. I think one of the problems of PowerPoint is part of the Microsoft suite. So people go into Word, they cut and paste 2 or 3 paragraphs, put them up on the PowerPoint and go, there's my slides. And of course, the problem with that is once it's up on the screen, inevitably, you as the presenter start to read it. And once you're reading, you're no longer presenting. And the other problem is, though, the audience can read faster than you will. So they'll read it quickly and go, I'm bored now. And so you lose people's attention. So yeah, probably the biggest one is too much slides. And again, if you want poor slides, just go onto Google Images and type in, and again, too much information, bad clip art, lots of stuff on the slides and so forth in there. So I'll give you a few suggestions. I'll just wait for myself to catch up. The first is the rule of 6 by 6. And what that means is 6 words across the screen and 6 lines from top to bottom, which means you only get to have 36 words as a maximum. That's not a target to aim for. Less than that would be good. But if you have slides that have more than that number of words, you are going to start reading it. The audience will read it. Now, there might be an exception. You might have one slide with some really important quotation or something like that. But if a lot of your slides have more than that, you got too much text on your screens, okay? So how many slides should you have? Well, no more than 1 per minute. So if you're giving a 15-minute presentation and you have 40 slides, you have too much information. That's when you're going to be pressing enter, enter, enter just to get to the end. And that's just wasting everyone's time, really. So no more than 1 per minute. Less would be good. The only exception might be if you have slides where, let's say you're showing pictures of an animal or a cell or something like that. If you have lots of images, but if you have slides where you have to talk about them and you have more than that, you're going to run out of time again. The next problem with PowerPoint is there are too many colors. They just have too much choices. People think, oh, I like green as a background. And so use 2 or 3 colors. And again, there at the university, you probably have a standard template. That's probably the one you should use. Use a consistent font, because people take a slide from here, slide from there, and you've got a big mess of fonts on the screen. Use a consistent size. Once again, if you've been bringing the slides together from different places, you'll have a whole mess of different sizes. But the real way you can recognize the new PowerPoint user is they have discovered animations. So use animations sparingly. You use an animation if there's a reason for you, not because you just found some way of making the ball bounce in or stuff like that, because the first time you do it, people think, oh, that's cute. But after a while, they go, can we just get on with the presentation here? So use animation sparingly. I'll show you a good example in a minute. So the font I'm using is Gill Sans MT. I'll put that into the chat for you. I like that font because, for 2 reasons. One is it's very easy to read font. It's very simple. But secondly, it is a standard font, so it's almost every computer. I don't think I've ever been to a computer where it doesn't have it. So it's a very standard font. So because if you find some really weird font, it looks great on your computer, but you go somewhere else, it's not going to be there. So again, the Gill Sans is a fairly standard one you'll find on most computers. If you look at the screen size, the font sizes there, size 12, very hard to read at the back of the room. And so that's where you use size 36 or size 48. If you're using the rule of 6 by 6, you can have big font like that, big size 36. If you look at the colors that I'm using on that screen, and a lot of the screens here, I'm using white on black because it's high contrast. You can see them to stand out. So again, you need high contrast colors that are going to stand out from the background. Where PowerPoint is good is you can use images and pictures. It's fantastic for that if you use it wisely. And I'll show you a few examples. I run another workshop for PhD students, and I talk about the PhD student's brain structure. So up at the front is the frontal lobe for procrastination, then the guilt complex, the perfectionism center, the posterior lobe for creative avoidance, and at the back, the center for worry and despair. And then the more positive areas are the creative neuron and the achievement neuron. Now, I do that because in that workshop, I'm going to be talking about procrastination, guilt, perfectionism. If I have those as list of bullet points, it's not very memorable, but the picture is memorable. But if it all comes up in one go like that, it's a bit overwhelming. So that's why it's good for it to come up one piece at a time, because I want to talk about that piece as I'm doing it. So if there's a reason for animation, then it's a good thing to do. So if people think I need pictures, and so they go onto Google Images and find some poor clip art and stick that on the slide. So again, let's say you're talking, I run a workshop with work-life balance. Work-life balance, it's not as easy to see, and so decide I'll get a picture. A better way to do that slide is to make the image the background of the whole slide and then put the words down there. Whereas if you look at those two slides side by side, the first one is not very memorable, but this one is, because you sort of remember that picture, that image. So now, this only works if you have images that have lots of white space on them. If you have lots of clutter in the background, you won't be able to read the words. But also you need high resolution, because if you're going to make it the whole screen, you need a high resolution so it won't pixelate. And I'm going to put a link into the chat for you now of a site that I use for lots of pictures called unsplash.com. And I like that one because there are thousands of high resolution images there, and they are all utterly free. There's no strings attached. And so, whereas with some of the others, there's royalties and a whole range of complications, and so you don't know whether it's copyright or not. There's another site I occasionally use. Pixabay.com. And again, there are lots of images there that you can use. Another one is to use your own images. Let's say you're talking about climate change, the extremes, more common weather events, more extremes. A better way to do that is make that the background of the whole thing and then go more extremes more often. And so there's less words on this slide, but it's more memorable than the other one. This one has what's called screen junk on it, which is logos and other things around, heading the bullet points, which really don't add very much. So a simpler slide, but it's more memorable. Now, a temptation when you are putting up the images is, in your research, you have some complicated table or something that you've used, an important table. So you put that on the screen. And of course, if that goes up on the screen, people get blown away by it. They just don't know what it means at all. It's way too complicated. This might be very important in your document or in your paper or whatever, but it's not very helpful on the screen. Because on the screen, it's only going to be there for a few seconds. And so you need to simplify it. Here's another example. This was the American Army's Afghan strategy. One of the generals said, when we understand that slide, we'll have won the war. Because, again, that might be useful to somebody, but it's of no good to anybody else at all. So the trick, if you are going to have charts, is keep charts simple. And so you've got to leave out all the extra information or all the stuff that doesn't really matter too much. So the slide on the screen should be quite simple and easy to read. There's another good site. This is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Communications Lab in the US. And they have a nice thing about communications, and they talk about, here's an okay design, some words. A better way would be to show that visually, donor A, donor B, and donor C. Another example is if this is the figure that you've got in your paper or in your thesis, really quite complicated, when you put it on the slide, you simplify it. You leave out the complicated bits. And so you make it easier to read. You don't need all the detail on the slide. So you have a more simple version on there. So again, the temptation is just go into Word, cut and paste and put it up there, but it's not going to work very well. So you need to keep the chart simple. All right, so that's PowerPoint. So now we go on to practicing. And so we've got our materials ready, we need to practice. And the way most people practice is what they do is they rehearse silently. They just go through the slides and rehearse in their head, which is a good start, but it's not going to be enough because when you speak, you have to say it out loud. And so you have to practice out loud as well. I'll show you why that's important. I'm going to put a sentence on the screen. And I want you to read it. So first of all, read that sentence. It's not very complicated. Now I want you to say it out loud. It only works if you say it out loud. And of course, as you say it, it gets complicated. Ken Dogs does, all the words blur together because it's a tongue twister. When you're reading it, it makes perfect sense. When you're saying it out loud, it doesn't work very well. So if you had that in your notes, what you have to do is cross it out and say, the dog died. And so you simplify it and get rid of complicated bits like that. So that's why you have to practice out loud. I'll show you another example. The area of research I work in is high performance. This idea of being in the zone or in the flow. And I try never to talk about the researcher because that's his name. His name is Mahali, all those letters. So try and say that. So when I started off saying his name, this is how I would do it, is Mahali Csikszentmihalyi. That's how you say it, Mahali Csikszentmihalyi. So again, if you have a complicated word like that, what you need to do is overlearn. And overlearn means you just practice it so many times that you can do it no matter how anxious you are, especially for complicated words. The other thing you should overlearn is your first couple of sentences, because that's when you're going to be most anxious at the beginning. So you learn those so that you can do them no matter how anxious you are. That's why, again, I try and keep the opening sentences quite simple, like, my name is Hugh Kearns, I work at Flinders. I can usually manage that no matter how anxious I am. So overlearn. The other reason why you have to practice it out loud is, this is if English isn't your first language, is there are many words in English that are not spoken the way they're written. So you think you've got it, but when you speak it, it sounds different. So you need to practice those words out loud. The other thing you need to practice is your timing. Because when you start talking, you lose all concept of time. Because you're anxious, you don't know whether you spent 5 minutes or 25 minutes. And so you lose that sense of time. So you need to practice. So that means you get out your notes and a little watch and you track how much it is. I've got this little notation I use for myself. So this circle says this talk is 25 minutes long. At this page, I should be 10 minutes into the talk. The next page probably has 15 of 25. So it tells me how I'm going, because once I start talking, I'll lose all concept of whether I've been going for 5 minutes or 25 minutes. And so keep a track of that. Now, the other thing you should practice when you are practicing is, it's good to have some noise in the background. Because when you're delivering a presentation, the room is never quiet. There are always noises going on. There'll be an air conditioner. There'll be people moving around in their chairs, people opening doors and so forth. So you have to practice a bit louder than you would normally speak. And so, because you have to raise your voice a bit. And again, you need to practice that. And if you have a quiet voice or you don't like speaking loudly, you need to practice that, because that's a skill you have to learn, is to project your voice. All right, so that's the practicing. Now we come to the delivery. This is the really scary part where you got to stand and do it. And there's a nice piece of research from a long time ago about the believability of talks. And it says words only account for about 7%. The non-verbals, the way you say the words, about a third. But the most important of all is body language. So we put all the effort into getting the words right, but that's not the most important part. The most important part is how you deliver the words, how you say them. And I'm going to show you, we'll look at non-verbals first. That's how you say the words. So I'm going to put a phrase on the screen. So have a look at that. Think, what does that mean? I'm now going to read that in 5 different ways that mean completely different things. I didn't say he couldn't communicate. 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 So completely different things depending on how you say them. That's why email is so dangerous, by the way. You write one thing and people read completely different messages. So how do you emphasize things? Well, you emphasize things by raising your voice. You know, this is very important. Listen to this. You emphasize things by lowering your voice. This is important. Listen to this now. You emphasize things by speeding things up. You emphasize things by slowing things down. In fact, you can emphasize things by saying nothing at all. just putting a pause in. Now that is very hard to do when you're anxious. Because when you're anxious, you just want to run to the end as fast as you can. So if you want to have a pause, you have to practice putting a pause in there. The other delivery thing people have to do is probably, again, talk louder. Talk more loudly than you would normally feel, because the assumption people have is if you have a loud, strong voice, you must know what you're talking about. That's not necessarily true, but unfortunately, that's what people think. And so you have to raise your voice, and especially if you've got a very quiet voice, you have to sort of work on projecting it or getting it out. So that's the words. Then the next one is the body language. And probably the biggest body language is eye contact. This is why reading your notes is a problem, because if you're reading your notes, you're not looking at the audience. If you're reading the screen, you're not looking at the audience. And so you need to look at the audience. Now, of course, people don't want to look at the audience because the audience is looking at you, so you try and avoid them. But what sometimes people do then is look at one person all the time and they forget everybody else. And so you need to do a sort of what's called a social gaze. And that means you look there for a second, then there for a second, and then there. And so you try and include everybody in the talk. And you don't even have to look at them in the eye. If you look broadly in the area of their forehead or their head, they'll think you're looking at them. And so you just broadly look at that part of the room. And then what do you do with the rest of your body? Well, Barack Obama is a good person to look at. Again, if you could manage to smile, that would be helpful. But the gestures, using your hands, again, you have to sort of peel them off the lectern and maybe use gestures. My advice is look at your normal gestures. When you're normally communicating, how do you do it? And you're sort of trying to replicate that, really. You want to use your hands to highlight things, 1, 2, 3, or whatever you're doing there. Now, that's your normal presentation, but now, for the last few years, we've had online presentations. And some people like online presentations better. Some people prefer face-to-face. And there's benefits of both. So I'm going to just give you a chance to type into the chat. Have you had a preference? Which do you prefer? And any advice or things you've learned from either attending or presenting in an online format. So which do you prefer and why? And anything you'd add on online presentations, because the problem with you can't do the body language thing, it's much harder. So let's see, do you have experience? Jed likes online. And like online, I find I can breathe a little easier being in a familiar place. One of the advantages is you're probably doing it in your own place and you can set it up more, so it's not as scary. Melissa says, yes, both are scary, but trickier a bit using technology under pressure when presenting online. Yeah, there's more things to go wrong in the online world. Your computer can go down, the internet goes down, so there's more things go wrong. Jack says, online feels lonely in a stressful way. Yeah, because you don't see people. You don't know whether there's anybody there at all. And it's tougher to get a read on how it's going. Absolutely. You have no idea. If you're in a room, you look at people, whether they're engaged or not engaged. If you're online, you don't see the people, and so you have no idea what's going on, whether they're there at all. And it's a reasonable assumption is they are going to be distracted, getting taken away by something else. So I'll give you a few thoughts on this. The first thing is it's both good and bad, really. You don't see the audience, so that's good. So it's not scary, but that's bad as well, because as Jack pointed out, you can't read the audience. So you have to act as though there is an audience. Even though you can't see them, you have to act as though they're there. And one lecturer had a nice way to remember that. They found these little Lego figurines and put them on top of their monitor to remind them there are people there. You have to imagine these people, even though you can't see them. So you put the people there. The next thing in the online world is, ideally, what I try and do is get the camera up at eye level. Because if your camera's down on the desk, you're looking down at people. If it's up there, you're looking up there. They're looking up your nose. So you're sort of trying to look straight ahead. Probably the biggest advice I give to people is look at the camera. Because we talk about eye contact. That's where the people are. It's very tempting to be looking at the slides, to be looking at another screen or whatever, but not seeing them. So to remind myself where the people are, I have this little cutout figure that I stick behind the camera to remind me that's where the people are. And so you need to look at the camera, and then that's where you're going to get the eye contact. If you're doing lots of online presentations, you need to get a big monitor. It is very hard to do everything on a laptop. because you're going to have several windows open at the same time. You might have your PowerPoint and you've got the Zoom or the Teams, whatever, and lots of other stuff going on. So you need a big monitor. So I'll show you my arrangement. That's the laptop down there with the PowerPoint on it. Then on the big screen behind is presenter view, so I can see what the next slide is going to be. Over there is the chat, so that I can see what people are saying. And over there are the participants, so I can see who's in the room at the time. So every time I have to give a talk, I have to spend a few minutes setting it up like that. But the benefit is, it's in my own place, so I can get it organized. But for presentations, you need as big a monitor as you can get or as you can manage. Another thing you have to remember is in the online world, you have to assume everything is always on. I've had lots of times over the last few years where I've had to mute people because they think nobody can hear them and they're talking away to their family or friends. Or I've had people where their videos are on and they're not aware of it and they're starting to take off their jumpers and things like that. So I get, and it's very easy to press mute and then you double press it so that it's gone back on again. So you have to assume it's always on, especially if it's been recorded, because you don't know where that's going to go. The next one is about backgrounds, because of course you're looking forward, but the audience is looking behind you. What's behind? So you need to check out what's behind you. And so, ideally a fairly plain wall or something that's not too distracting, because if people are getting distracted by lots of people moving around, it's not good. I'm using a virtual background. If you do have to have that, you have to have good lighting, because otherwise you sort of fade in and out of the whole thing. So a background that doesn't distract people. Well, one thing I've learned in the online world is about clothes. If you have clothes with lots of stripes on it like that, when you move, all the stripes sort of form patterns and moire patterns, and you can give people epileptic fits. And so I try and tend to use a block color rather than lots of stripes. But the biggest thing we've all learned in the online world is about cats and dogs and callers. And I'm going to play a very famous clip from Robert E. Kelly. So you've probably seen this before.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
I think he did pretty well to keep going at all. I would have bailed out by that point to turn off the camera or something like that. But I remember hearing an interview with him, and he's more famous with that clip than for any of his journalism work. And now this was in 2017. That was before we all got into Zoom and other things. Since then, people are really used to seeing cats and dogs and people wandering by and so forth. So first of all, Robert, what he should have done was locked the door so that nobody can get in. So again, if you're doing it at home or whatever, lock the door, tell people do not come in, or during the presentation when I'm giving a talk. The problem with cats and dogs and other things is it's not something the audience don't really care very much. In fact, the audience find it quite cute to see. The main problem is it distracts you. You're trying to focus on one thing and the cat's going across your keyboard, pressing buttons as it goes along, or causing distractions. So it's more that it puts you out than the audience. The audience are usually fairly forgiving of those things. As with Robert, when that's happening, it's very hard for him to focus on what he has to do. All right. So now we come to the next topic, which is anxiety. And most people get anxious in some situation or other. Some people get anxious with large groups. Some get anxious with small groups. Some get anxious with people they don't know. Some get anxious with strangers or with people they do. So almost everybody gets anxious in some case. So I'm going to put you into the breakout groups again. And I want you to tell people, first of all, do you get anxious? What makes you anxious? Are there some situations that make it worse than others? And how do you deal with it? So let me put you back into the groups again. So anxiety. All right. So welcome back. So first of all, most people get anxious, but we sort of have beliefs about anxiety, and I call these the myths. And the first myth is other people don't get as anxious as I do. We think other people don't suffer as much, but the reality is most people get anxious. And that's a picture of Churchill. He used to be almost ill before he gave those great speeches, and we will fight them on the beaches, but he still did it. So the reality is most people get anxious, but they just go through it. The other belief is people think, I'll wait until I don't feel anxious, and then I'll give the presentation. And of course, that doesn't work, because the only way you're going to get rid of the anxiety is to go through it. You have to actually deal with that anxiety and get on with it. So that's why I would encourage you to take every opportunity when there's a chance to give a talk in your team or your little group, put your hand up and have a go, because you don't want your first presentation to be in front of hundreds of people. So you want to practice it in small places, deal with the anxiety and start learning how to cope with it. And the other myth is people say, I'll watch others present, and that will make me a better presenter. And I always say that is like watching Wimbledon and hope you get better at playing tennis. If you want to get better at playing tennis, you practice tennis. If you watch television, you learn how Roger Federer plays. But if you want to get better at public speaking, you practice public speaking. You don't attend any workshops. You have to try it out. Now, if you do feel anxious, you're in good company. It even has a name. It's called glossophobia. That's the fear of speaking in public. And when you look at those lists of top fears, about 40% of people would say they fear speaking in public. And some people would be higher. It's more than heights or closed spaces. So it's very, very common. And in fact, some people would say, I would rather die than speak in public, which is a bit extreme when you think about it. But for many people, it's very uncomfortable. So what can we do about it? Well, I'll tell this story about Barbra Streisand. She was giving a concert in the US many years ago. And halfway through one of the songs, the tape recorder got jammed. And, she forgot the words to the song. Now, the audience can remember the words, but she can't. And so, this probably happens to lots of artists, but, they hum along or make the words. But she got really anxious and she walked off stage. And she didn't perform in public for many years again after that. And now when she performs, she has a teleprompter with the words on it, because, if you think it happened once, this is going to happen again. So first of all, you have to realize it's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. Most people feel like that. I've said, 40% and more. So it's pretty normal. The second thing is prepare well. If you know your stuff, if you know the audience and you know the room and the equipment and it's probably going to work, it doesn't feel so bad. And so prepare well, because if you don't prepare, you should be anxious. Things probably are going to go wrong. The next one is to reframe. So what does that mean? Well, what are the physical symptoms of anxiety? The physical symptoms are butterflies in the tummy, increased heart rate, sweaty palms, whatever. What are the symptoms of excitement? You're looking forward to something. Well, it's butterflies in the tummy, increased heart rate. And at low levels, excitement and anxiety are sort of pretty much the same thing. And so you have to go, when you're feeling that, this is me just getting ready for the occasion. So you reframe it into something positive to help you do the job. The next thing is to breathe, because when you start getting anxious, a whole lot of things happen in your body. And it's basically the fight or flight response, which is your body says something scary is going to happen. We have to run away or we have to fight. So what happens is you start breathing in the air quickly to get ready for it to run away. But then you blow it out quickly, and then you start to sort of pant a bit and hyperventilate. And so the way to overcome that is to breathe. Now, probably the time you are most anxious is the minute or two before the previous person finishes and they call out your name, because you're going to be sitting there getting more anxious. So at that point, what you need to do is breathe. And that means you breathe in through your nose and just blow out slowly. And that just calms everything down a little bit. It's also good because you need air to get the words out, but it's to practice that as well. So breathing, especially when you're more and more anxious, just as your name is going to be called, remember to breathe. But the other thing, as people are sitting waiting for their name to be called, what happens is they're sitting there often playing themselves horror movies in their brain. And they're going, what's going to go wrong? People are going to ask me horrible questions. I'm going to trip. I'm going to get it wrong. And that does not help very much. So what you need to be doing is looking at how you think and how you visualize. As you're sitting there waiting, because the horror movies are, what if I can't answer all the questions? I'm going to make some terrible mistake. What if I forget everything? And in psychology, we call these automatic negative thoughts, or ANTs for short. And I'm going to look at a few. And so, if you're sitting there and you get, what if I forget everything? If this is something that worries you, well, we need to look at what I call MATs, which is more accurate thoughts. So what's more accurate? Well, it's possible, but unlikely. And I have my notes. And like, if you really are worried about forgetting things, have good notes. If you just can't remember, or you've got complicated stuff, have good notes. Then you're not going to worry about forgetting everything. Or you'll say, I'll be boring. They'll be sitting at the back of the room, looking at their watches, thinking, is this ever going to be over? Well, the reality is, I've prepared well. If I stick to my plan, I'll be fine. Because the good news for all of you is the standard of academic presentations is depressingly low. And I find that very reassuring. You don't have to try that hard to look good. Because I'm sure you've all been to talks where the person, you couldn't hear their voice, they mumbled, couldn't read their slides, they went around in circles, and people still clap at the end. And that should be reassuring to you, is if you do the things we've talked about today, if you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, slides people can read and they can hear your voice, you're going to be fine. And if you practice, you actually become quite good at this as well. A worry is they're going to ask tricky questions. That really worries people. And so the reality is you can prepare for most questions. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. You don't have to know everything. It is not a quiz show. The other one that I'm going to go red. I'm going to come out in bright red, or I'm going to sweat pools of water, or I'll shake, or my voice will tremble. And of course, because you're in your body, you feel these things intently. The reality is most people will never notice, and nobody will remember. For you, it's intense. For the audience, they'll go, must have been anxious. Let's move on to the next thing. So, we overestimate how significant this is to other people. And so if you come out a little bit red, too bad, nobody cares that much. Or you sweat a little bit, so nobody will remember. So when you're sitting there worrying about these things, you need to calm yourself down and go, it's okay, I've prepared well, it's going to be fine. The other thing that worries sometimes people is you look out at the audience and there's some professor out there or some person in your field who looks really grumpy and they've got a really angry face on them. And of course, you look at them and you think, what have I done wrong? So if there is a scary person in the audience like that, my advice is don't look at them. In every audience, there are also what I call the nodders and the smilers. These are the people who are nodding and smiling. Look at them. They make you feel better, and then you do better. So if there's a scary person, don't look at them, because you'll be worrying, what have I done wrong? So look at the people who are encouraging you, engaging you to do it, and you'll go better there. Okay, now the thing that really makes people anxious is question time. Because you can prepare your own stuff, but what about the questions? How do you get ready for them? You don't know what they're going to ask. So the first thing about question time is worse than getting questions sometimes is you get to the end and you say, any questions? And then there's that horrible silence and nobody asks a question. And you think, oh, I've bored them to tears. They can't bear to ask any questions. Now, there are many reasons there might not be questions. One is you're the person just before morning tea and they all want to get out and get the sandwiches or the biscuits. So it could be that, it might not be you at all. The other reason is sometimes people don't want to be the first person to ask a question, or they might be a little bit anxious as well. And so it might not be you at all. So, but if you do want questions, it's not very hard to get questions. One strategy is bring along a friend. And at the beginning you say, when we get to the end, I've got a question. Would you ask me this question? And you give them the question. And then you get to the end and say, any questions? And your friend puts up their hand and says, well, I've got a question. And they ask it and you answer it very well because you know the question. But because sometimes people don't want to be the first person to ask. And once one person's asked, other people ask as well. Or if you've been introduced by a chairperson, you give them a question and they ask you the question. So it's not that hard to get over that. Sometimes I ask myself questions. We get to the end and I'll say, any questions? And say, well, sometimes the question that comes up is, and I'll ask it and answer it. And it looks like there's been a question. So you can get over that pretty easily. Or you could just say, thank you. And maybe there aren't any questions. But let's say now there are questions. So the first thing is, prepare for the obvious questions. You can predict about 50% of the questions. They're going to ask you, why did you do that? How did you find these things? Now, prepare does not mean make it up on the day. Prepare means write out your answers and practice them. Because again, when you're sitting at home, this is all very easy. When you're under pressure and 90% of your brain is gone, you can't think of those obvious answers. And so you write them out and even have notes with them to remind you of some of the things that are going to come up. So that's about 50%. Then prepare for the tricky questions. These are the ones you're hoping they don't ask. Let's say there's some sort of gap in your research and you say, I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. Now, what are you going to say if they ask that? And again, preparing means write it out and practice it. So that should be about another 25%. So that leaves the bit in the middle, and you can prepare for them too. The first one is admit it. You can say, look, that's a good question. I don't have the answer. Because it isn't a quiz show. It's not like you have to know everything. Another important thing is to buy yourself some time. The reason question time is hard is you didn't have time to think. So buying time would be repeat the question. Look, that's a great question. I'm just going to repeat it so everybody else can hear it. Which is a good idea anyway, but also it allows you to think, what am I going to say next? So repeat the question. Another one is, let's say they've asked some complicated question or one you don't know the answer. Look, a great question. I don't have the answer with me right now. Come down and see me afterwards and talk about it one-on-one. And most of us one-on-one quite happy, but when you do it in front of a room, it's much harder. So see me afterwards. Another phrase you should all learn is beyond the scope. Anything you don't want to talk about is beyond the scope of your presentation. Because when you think about it, you're supposed to know your own stuff, but you don't know everything else. So when someone says, your research is interesting, how does that relate to other people's research? Well, that's beyond the scope of this talk or whatever. I'm happy to talk about it later, come and see me, whatever. So beyond the scope is a useful phrase. Another thing sometimes I will do is, let's say someone asks a question, is you put it back to the audience or you put it back to the person themselves. Look, that's a great question. What do you think? And I think in most cases, you need to reframe question time as discussion time. It's not like a quiz show. We're not trying to catch you out. It's meant to be a discussion about what have you done. So what do you think? Because if they've asked a question, they probably have a reason for it. And so you can have a discussion about that. So you need to reframe that rather than they're trying to catch you out, is we're having a discussion here. That's where you can include other people or get them involved as well. So now we're coming to the end in a few more minutes, but now is a chance for questions. And I'm going to give you a time to type in your questions if you want, or you can put up your hand and ask them if you want either. And this is where we get the horrible silence and nobody says anything. So what I often say, well, a question that often comes up at this point is, what if you can't understand the question? It's not that you can't answer it. You don't even understand what they're asking. So the first thing is ask them to repeat the question. You could say, look, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it. Could you repeat the question? So they have another go and you still don't understand. So then what I would say is get help. And that's where you could say to anybody else can help. Does anybody else know what the question is? And if that doesn't work, you'd say, look, I'm sorry, my fault. How about you come down afterwards and I'm very happy to talk to you. And I'm pretty kind to myself because I'm thinking this is difficult. They've asked a really weird question or something that's hard to understand. I'm only working on 10% of my brains here. And so come down later and I'm happy to talk about it then. So rather than beating myself saying I can't do it is, I'm giving you some options and strategies here. So let's see, any questions you want to ask at this point? Now is your chance to do that.
Hey, yeah, Hugh, sorry, I do have a question.
Yeah, Jordan, go on for it.
Just with regard to the seminar today, will this be going up again later for me to go through some of the slides or some of the material we've already talked about?
Yeah, I'm going to send the slides through first of all, so you'll have copies of those. And I think Alison has recorded it as well, so it'll be available so you can check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, yeah, because obviously, it's hard to do it while we're talking about it, but it's good to go through again. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be uploading the recording to our YouTube channel, and I'll send everyone the link when it's up. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Alison.
You're welcome.
Bridget said, how do you keep track of time? Yeah, look, first of all, when you are talking, you tend to lose all ability of time or a sense of time. So what I do is I have a little clock that I have and that I keep nearby my computer so that I can look at that. A digital clock is much better than an analog because when you're stressed, you can't read an analog clock, so you can read the digital one. And again, I'll practice and look at that as well. Again, for many people, you use your phone as your clock. But that doesn't work very well when you're giving a presentation because you can't keep turning on your phone all the time. And so I would have a little digital clock like that I keep on track so that I can keep on track with that. Again, because I've run a workshop like this many times, I have a good idea where I'm supposed to be at the various times. If I haven't, that's when I'll write notes on it to say, 10 minutes left or whatever, so that it reminds me what I have to do as I go through. The other thing is, if I'm giving a face-to-face room, I'll bring a clock with me because the room might have a clock, but inevitably it will be wrong. All those clocks are wrong. And so you look at them and that doesn't help at all. So you need your own clock that you bring with you to keep on track with the time. Yeah.
Just a couple of comments, Hugh, like with getting practice is just running through it on you and recording it on your mobile phone and then having a look back and just observing your pace and your tone of voice and stuff. And you don't have to send it anywhere. You can delete it. It's just for you.
Yeah. And well, again, nowadays on things like Zoom and other places, and even in PowerPoint, I think you can record yourself doing it and look back at it again. Now, you have to use that with caution because for some people, looking at themselves is so unpleasant. They will never walk out of their house again. So you need to be a little bit confident of doing that as well. But if you do it, you will learn a lot about yourself because you don't realize the things you do. And so again, if you want to get good, recording and watching it back, but being a bit kind to yourself is really helpful. It just helps you.
Well, maybe do some just audio recording on your phone.
And the audio one is really helpful as well because it tells you whether you're speeding up or various times. And so so again, it depends on how confident you are. But if you want to be a really good speaker, like people who do this professionally for a living, they will record themselves, debrief themselves, go back and look at them as well. So yeah. Yeah, Melissa had a question. Any tips to minimize ums and ahs? And look, in my experience, ums and ahs, and I don't do many, but I will do them when I don't know my material very well. Because ums and ahs are essentially filler words because I don't know what to say. So your brain goes, and ah. So the first way to get rid of them is practice your stuff really well so that you know the stuff because then you don't do ums and ahs as much. I used to tell people, you just watch ums and ahs, but the problem is if you start becoming aware of them, you become so conscious of the ums and ahs, you don't actually want to talk at all. So I think that the best way to deal with it is know your stuff well, and then you don't need so many ums and ahs. And reduce them a little bit like that, or other sort of little ticks or things. Often people say things like, or we will have phrases we use over and over again. Often that's where, again, recording them can be good use because you realize, hang on, I didn't know I said that so often because you don't even know your own little verbal ticks or whatever. Yeah. But the solution these are filler words. So they're trying to make up the gaps in what you have to say. So I think that's where if you know your stuff really well, often what happens is when people ask you a question, you're trying to think and you go, and ah. That's when you need to just have a pause for a second, just allow a little time to think, and then you can say the words. All right. Now, I've got one question I'm going to ask you, and then we'll wrap up. In a moment, I'm going to ask you what has been most interesting or useful, but I'll recap for you. So we started off with Martin Luther King. Remember back to that? And, put some energy and passion into your talk. If the other good thing for you to know is if the audience look like you are trying and you're keen and eager, they will forgive lots of mistakes. If you look passionate and interesting, they'll forgive lots of the other things going wrong. We talked about the coffee shop test. They're not going to remember it all. So what's the main thing they're going to remember? You need to know your audience. Who's going to be in the room? Find out a bit about them. Structuring your talk, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you could link them together, it's probably a nice strategy. Your notes, write them on your hand isn't very good, but equally size 12 font doesn't work very well. You need big notes so that you can look down and find your place really quickly. PowerPoint, the rule of 6 by 6, no more than 1 per minute. But images and pictures are really good, but try and find powerful images that people remember. If you look at the slides I've got on the screen now, it's mostly images and not many words. You remember what the image talks about. You have to practice it out loud. There's no good saying it in your head. You have to, again, record it and go through it. Body language and eye contact, look at the audience. We talked about anxiety. And most people get anxious. It's normal enough to feel anxious, but then you sort of talk yourself down and calm yourself through. And question time, you can prepare for most of the questions. So I'm going to get you to just type into the chat for me now. What has been the most interesting or useful thing? It could have been something I said, or maybe talking to other people, or maybe seeing how you might structure a talk or how to handle questions. So I'll give you a moment to type in most interesting or useful for you. Melissa liked the tips for PowerPoint. Yep. And again, that rule of 6 by 6, the biggest one is too much text. But I like the way you organize the slides. But yeah, and you can get all these afterwards. Extensive preparation. Yes, people do a lot of extensive worry, but not preparation. So all that worry, put it into practicing, is going to work better. Jack says, make the introduction personable, mentioning our background, why we're interested, and then tips on making it topical. Yeah, audiences like to know a little bit about you, so that you're allowed to have a little bit of personality in it. It says, from the whole presentation interesting, or from the tips on the PowerPoint is most useful for you. Great. All right. Julius, impactful PowerPoint graphics using images cleverly. Yeah. Karen says, your slides and the way you spoke embodied your message. Good. Okay, now a couple of fun things. I'm going to send these slides through to Alison, and so she'll send them out to you. So you'll have copies of everything we've done here, and it's recorded, so you can look at it again if you want. Look, thanks a lot for your contributions in the breakouts and in the chats, because people learn a lot from just hearing other people's ideas as much as what I do here. So, look, I'm going to leave it there. I'll hand back to Alison in case you want to say anything, but that's enough from me.
Well, thanks so much, Hugh. That was awesome. I think everyone found that very helpful and rewarding. So, yeah, we'll finish up there. Thanks again.
Okay. See you later.